standing in the back. If you would like to walk forward and just hover over a seat, click it, and you will sit down wherever you would like.
All right, a minute's already been passed, so let's go ahead and get started. First of all, I want to thank everybody that's here for being at this presentation. This is really going to be a great presentation on your sales. But before we get started, I just want to reference you to the slide on the your stage left. Our conference sponsor is Burke & Pruski. They're a metal fab and powder coating company, and we're very grateful for them being our conference sponsor for this year's virtual trade show and conference. And so now, oh, I got the wrong one here, I'm sorry. Let me, please bear with me. We're very happy to have Justin Roth-Marsh as our guest speaker today, our keynote speaker, and he is the founder of Ballistic and the developer of sales process engineering. Ballistic builds highly efficient sales functions for organizations in North America, Australia, and United Kingdom. Sales process engineering is a radical approach to the design and management of sales functions. So without further ado, Justin, I'm going to turn it over to you so we can hear your presentation. Thank you so much.
Hey, thank you, and it's nice to be here. So today, notionally, I want to talk about sales, but really the subject matter is a little broader than that. I want to talk about the organization as a whole through the lens of sales, or more specifically about how to grow your organization, or more specifically still about how to grow your organization aggressively. And the reason I'll make that point is that this subject matter isn't designed to be for every executive. It's designed specifically for those executives who want to grow their organizations aggressively. And that doesn't have to be all of you. I mean, it may well be that your organization has reached a size where incremental growth is more than sufficient. You know, if you dominate your industry, incremental growth may well be what the doctor ordered. But for those folks who want to grow aggressively, this is our approach to doing that. I'm going to talk about the organization as a whole, but I'm going to talk about it through the lens of sales, as I said at the outset. I'm going to talk for about 60 minutes, hopefully a little less. Then we're going to open this up for questions. And I can imagine some of the questions you're going to have, distributing direct through distributors, I'm hoping is going to be one of the first questions, but we'll see what happens when we get there. What I want to do is I want to get you started off with a little bit of controversy, and there's going to be plenty of that in the presentation today. But I want to start with a question, the answer to which is probably obvious. And that question is, what department in your organization is responsible for revenue? Now, I don't know if you guys can come off mute and just yell it out. If so, be my guest. If not, I'm going to take a guess at what the common answer is going to
be. Justin, do you want to go ahead and put your left screen up?
Yeah, let me do that real quick. There we go. Okay, so hang on, let me just click on the middle one again. Oops, advance the slide. Okay, so back to that question. What department is responsible for revenue? I'm guessing if you guys could speak, you would be saying sales. And as you probably guessed, I'm going to argue that answer, the obvious answer, is not true. Sales should not be responsible for revenue. But what's interesting about this discussion is not just that it's not true that sales should be responsible for revenue, it's clearly not true. So what I'm going to point you to is what I think is a truth. You're welcome to disagree, but a truth that's been hiding in plain sight for years. So let's get on with it. What department is responsible for revenue? My answer is not sales, or more specifically, operations. How can I claim that? Well, to make an argument, let me point you to two observations about a typical organization. And you can agree whether these observations are true of a typical organization. You can also reflect on whether these observations are true of your organization. So the first observation is that in most organizations, in any given reporting period, most revenue comes from existing customers repurchasing. Not from new business, but from existing customers repurchasing. And I'm guessing that's true for most of you. The second observation is that if you look at why customers leave and go to a competitor, defect and go to a competitor, and you rank the reasons why they leave in descending order, it's true for almost every organization that the top 3 reasons in descending order why customers leave are poor on-time delivery performance, problems with pricing, they don't like your pricing in other words, or product problems, meaning either product problems with the performance of your product or an insufficient range of products. Now, those 3 reasons why customers leave are a standard across the board, and more interestingly, they are the top 3 reasons by country mile. So these are both fairly uncontroversial observations. True, I suspect, for most of you. But let's think about what they mean. If most of your revenue in any given period comes from existing customers repurchasing, that means salespeople didn't directly generate it. They might have directly generated it in some previous period, but they didn't directly generate it in that period. And salespeople might make a claim, well, we're responsible for retaining revenue. But it turns out they're not, because the second observation tells us that if customers leave, it's most likely that they're going to leave for operational reasons, on-time delivery performance, pricing problems, or product problems, none of which salespeople have direct control over. So salespeople don't have direct control over most of the revenue, and they don't even have direct control over it either, because it's not sensible, it's not reasonable to hold salespeople responsible for retention. So I think it's hard to acknowledge the existence of those 2 observations and maintain an argument that sales should be responsible for revenue. Clearly, operations should be responsible for revenue. Now that raises 2 interesting questions. The first is, well, what are the implications of that for operations? Because most operations departments, and by operations I'm referring to everything other than sales, most organizations, operations has not been designed to be responsible for revenue. The other question is, what are the implications for the sales department? So let's talk about that, seeing as today's about sales. What are the implications for sales if operations is responsible for revenue? What is sales responsible for? Well, my claim is that sales is responsible for new business. Fairly uncontroversial. But I'm sure someone is wondering right now, well, why make a distinction between new business and existing business? Both generate revenue. And there's a mistake here. And the mistake in reasoning is it doesn't make sense to conflate the revenue associated with new transactions with the revenue associated with existing customers. And the reason it doesn't is because the value of a transaction made by an existing customer is the face value of an invoice. However, the value of a transaction made by a first-time customer is the net present value of the future cash flow that's associated with that first invoice. So when we're talking about new business, we're talking about sales winning annuities, where an annuity is, I guess, an economist's term for a string of future payments. And we all know how to value an annuity. We calculate the net present value, the value today of that stream of future payments. And in calculating the value today, we all already know that we take into account inflation, and we also take into account the uncertainty associated with that stream of future payments. But all of us understand, I think, the concept of net present value. So if we're talking about new business, it doesn't make sense to talk about the face value of the initial invoice. We should be valuing new business on the basis of the net present value of the annuity that piece of business represents. So my suggestion is operations should be responsible for revenue, all of it. And sales should be exclusively responsible for the net present value of new business won during any reporting period, not the face value of invoices. Now you can think for yourselves about the implications this would have for the design of the organization and how you go about designing and managing the sales function in particular. But I'm going to leave that thought that I've planted in your heads and jump straight to a discussion of what would we do at Ballistics if we were given the responsibility for growing sales rapidly for your organization, because that's what we do. And we've been doing it for 25 plus years, and we have a fairly well-developed formula that works reasonably well in most organizations at growing organizations quickly. The assumption here is that the organization we're talking about has good fundamentals, but if you show me an organization that has good fundamentals, I would be reasonably confident that we can grow that organization aggressively with these three directives that you're looking at on the screen here. So this is me opening the kimono and showing you how we would go about growing an organization if an executive team was crazy enough to let us inside. So there's three directives that we would issue. All of them are controversial. So it's important to remember the objective of this presentation is not to make friends. The objective of this presentation is to actually let you know how we grow organizations. So what would we do? First thing that we would do is restructure the organization so that salespeople do nothing but sell. And by sell, I mean have selling conversations. And by have selling conversations, what I mean is that salespeople do nothing other than have conversations with existing or potential customers about them purchasing new business, committing to new business. And by new business, I mean winning new accounts, selling new categories of business to existing accounts. So we want to restructure the organization so that salespeople do nothing other than that. So salespeople no longer manage accounts. Salespeople are no longer involved in repeat transactions. Salespeople are no longer designing solutions or generating quotes. Salespeople are exclusively engaged in conversations where the explicit objective of each conversation is to win a new piece of business, meaning a new account or a new category of business from an existing account. And as we'll get to in a minute, that requires not just a restructure of the sales department, but a restructure of the whole organization. And I've already kind of hinted at that with my discussion about the responsibility of revenue just a moment ago. So that's the first thing we're going to do, directive number one. Directive number two is we're going to look at all sales-related activities that occur in the field currently. And for each activity that occurs in the field currently, we're going to ask the question, does this activity absolutely have to be performed in the field, face-to-face with a customer or prospective customer? And if the answer is no, this activity does not absolutely have to be performed face-to-face with a potential customer, as you probably already guessed, our directive is going to be, well, move it inside. Doesn't have to be performed face-to-face, move it inside. Now, if that activity does have to be performed face-to-face with a customer, our directive will be, we'll throw more resources at it. If this opportunity is significant enough, and if this activity within that significant opportunity is also significant enough to warrant someone from your organization being face-to-face with a potential customer, then rather than sending a $90,000 salesperson, maybe you should be sending a $150,000 salesperson. Maybe rather than sending a single person to visit the customer, you should be sending a small team of people to visit the customer. Maybe an enterprise salesperson plus an engineer plus someone from project management. And if it makes sense to go and visit the customer for any period of time, it probably makes sense to visit the customer for a sensible period of time. So I would suggest if you're going to go visit a customer, make sure it's for at least a one-day workshop, if not a two-day workshop. So our position is not that sales activities should not be performed in the field. It's that for the most part, they shouldn't. But on the rare occasions where it genuinely makes sense to be face-to-face with a customer, you want to make sure that you are throwing sufficient resources at it, which of course is the opposite of what happens in most organizations. Salespeople are face-to-face unnecessarily, and you have a situation where a salesperson will fly across the country to have a coffee with someone at the Starbucks downstairs from their office. Now, the end result of directive number two is that in practice, we move all sales activities inside. Not almost all sales activities, but all sales activities. Or to be more specific, we move all selling conversations inside. So if we look at the pursuit of even a major deal, and we look at the activities that genuinely need to be performed face-to-face, Those activities tend to be technical or semi-technical in nature. The two standard activities that need to be performed face-to-face are detailed requirement discovery and demonstrations. And if you're selling something that's reasonably technical, you have probably already figured out salespeople are not the best people to be doing detailed requirement discovery or demonstrations. Those should probably be performed by engineers, probably application engineers. And certainly when we work in high tech, or when we work with organizations that do deals in the $1 million plus range, it is unthinkable that salespeople would be responsible for demonstrations or detailed requirement discovery. So for those of you who are doing deals that are lesser in size than $1 million, I would encourage you to think similarly and to recognize that if there's a requirement to be face-to-face as part of the pursuit of a sales opportunity, the requirement is probably for you to have an application engineer on premise with the customer, not to have a salesperson. The end result of that is that in actuality, we move all sales activities inside and have a small group of application engineers who can drop in to visit customers to do detailed requirement discovery or demonstrations in support of the internal sales effort. Third directive is the most controversial of all of them, but it shouldn't be. Third directive is that we eliminate salespeople's autonomy. And a part of eliminating their autonomy is that we take away their commissions. So we get rid of the notion of account ownership. No one salesperson owns, or no account is owned by a particular salesperson any more than a specific order in production is owned by a specific operator on the shop floor. And along with the removal of autonomy, we get rid of commissions. Now you might be thinking, why would you want to do that? And there are two reasons why we might want to do that. The first is because we think eliminating commissions is going to make the sales function perform better. And we do think that, and it's true that the elimination of commissions will help the sales function to perform better, but that's not why we do it. The reason we do it is that we know from experience that if we need to grow an organization rapidly, it's the first two directives that you're looking at on the screen right now that are really going to move the needle. And the cold, hard reality is that you, as senior executives, as masters of your own little universes, do not actually have the authority to execute the first two directives on the screen there unless you first take away salespeople's autonomy. So what I'm suggesting is, as powerful as you are, it is not practical for you to believe that you can assemble your salespeople and read them directive number 1, directive number 2, and expect them to go away and tomorrow adapt their modus operandi so as to fall in line with those two directives. It will simply not happen. If you were to assemble your salespeople, or if a typical executive was to assemble a typical team of salespeople whose engagement with the organization is structured the standard way, and talk to them about directive number 1 and number 2, what's going to happen is a salesperson or a director of sales will agree that all of this makes sense in theory. These are good ideas. But if you check in on the sales team in a couple of days' time, you will find that they have gone back to operating exactly as they were previously. So the reason we're going to take away salespeople autonomy and their commissions is not because we don't like commissions, even though we don't, because we know from experience that if you're going to grow your organization aggressively, it's going to be the top two directives that really make the difference. Putting salespeople in an environment where they do nothing but selling conversations, one after the other, all day long, and moving selling conversations inside. That's where growth is going to come from. Now, what I want to do is, and remember, we do have a question time afterwards. I know some of this stuff is controversial. So you have my permission to challenge anything that's on the screen here. Let me see if I can advance my slides. I don't know why that's not working. Okay, what I want to start with is a quick review of how you grow a business in the first place. And this is nice to kind of set the scene. So in my experience, the basic formula for growing a business rapidly is incredibly simple, stupidly simple. But the execution of this formula is incredibly difficult. And what tends to happen is executives get mired in the complexity associated with execution and forget that at root, basic formula is simple. And it's very handy, I think, to stay grounded by remembering when you're in the midst of complexity that the job you're trying to do is fundamentally simple. So here's my simple growth formula. As far as I'm concerned, there's three things that you need to do to grow an organization rapidly, and only the first two are compulsory. The third one is optional. Third one relates to sales. So the first thing that you have to do is create a meaningfully differentiated product or service. Pretty obvious. Meaningfully as judged by the marketplace, obviously, not by your mum. And it turns out that if you do a really, really good job of number one, that's actually all you have to do. Come up with a product that is meaningfully differentiated enough, you can have all sorts of operational problems and still thrive. And you can completely neglect sales and still thrive. And an example of that is Uber. You've all witnessed the meteoric growth of Uber. I'm sure in your own lifetimes, you've gone from not knowing Uber existed to being skeptical about this crazy concept that involved jumping in strangers' cars, to almost forgetting what a traditional taxi cab is. And this has all happened in a very short period of time. And the reason for that is obvious. And that's that Travis Kalanick, well, he didn't actually come up with the concept, but the folks in the space came up with this idea that turned out to be a breakthrough idea, that you could summon a vehicle from your cell phone and watch it approaching and leap out of the vehicle at the end of the ride without having to fiddle around with cash. And that was such a compelling idea, it turned Uber into a multi-billion-dollar business surprisingly quickly. So that should be obvious. But I got to say, in a lot of cases, if we're struggling with an organization, with an executive team trying to grow their organization, it's probably not that we got sales problems. It's probably a function of the lack of a meaningfully differentiated product. I can't help with that. But what I can do is remind you of the fact that product is the fountainhead from which all business success and wealth flows. So you need to get that right first. The second thing that you need to do is to make sure that once you have a compelling product, is to make sure that your operational performance is well within customers' expectations. And really, this distills in most environments down to speed. You need to fulfill orders faster than your competitors can fulfill orders. In fact, you need to be able to do everything faster than your competitors can. You need to answer the phone faster, quote faster, fulfill faster, solve problems faster. And generally speaking, in business, particularly in the industrial sector, speed wins. That's kind of our default assumption. Unless there's strong evidence to the contrary, it makes sense to assume that speed is going to win. And you want to make sure that your operational performance is well within customers' reasonable expectations. And practically, that means you need to be faster than the rest of the cohort with which you compete. If you're not, then don't come talking to me about sales. Focus on fixing your operational problems so that you are best in class when it comes to speed. I mean, really, you have two choices to win as far as I'm concerned. One is to be the biggest, and if you're not the biggest, you probably should figure out how to be the fastest. Because if you don't figure out how to be the fastest, it's very unlikely that you're ever going to be the biggest. And an example of this was Dell. Of course, Dell went from nothing to number one in personal computer sales in a very short period of time, maybe 10 years, 15 years. I'm not sure the exact time frame. Something like that. And the product Dell was selling was not essentially different. They simply delivered it faster. I bought lots of machines, I still do, from Dell. And the Dell formula always seemed to be the same. And it was, they promise you a machine in 10 days, deliver it in 9. And that was even in Australia, where I grew up. Even in Australia, where folks have hardly heard of Amazon. Well, they have, but Amazon hasn't really taken root in Australia like it has here. Even in Australia, you could set your watch by Dell. They promise you the computer in 10 days, deliver it in 9. The third requirement is to take your compelling proposition and let the market know about it. So where does the compelling proposition come from? Well, the compelling proposition comes from some combination of one or two, obviously. A meaningfully differentiated product plus the ability to deliver it faster. Those two things together are what I call a compelling proposition. If you have a compelling proposition and you advise the marketplace of the existence of that compelling proposition, then logically, folks will transact with you. So if you have a compelling proposition and folks are not transacting with you, what you need to do is let them know about the existence of that proposition, and they will. If you let them know about the existence of that proposition and they don't, then the problem isn't a sales problem. The problem is logically a product design or delivery design problem. So the reason I'm pressing this point is I want you all to understand where sales is concerned. The power of sales function is significantly less than you perhaps have traditionally thought it is, and significantly less than your sales folks will argue that it is. The role of your sales function is not to compel people, customers to do something that is not in their best interests. The job of your sales function is simply to advise the marketplace of the existence of your compelling proposition and perhaps compel prospective customers to purchase first time. That is all you should be expecting of your sales department. And to expect any more than that of your sales department is to fail to understand this simple generic formula. So if you've got the formula right for your business and you have a compelling proposition, what you need to do is, figuratively speaking, stand on a soapbox and as loudly as possible, alert as great a percentage of the population as you possibly can, as rapidly as possible, to the existence of your proposition, and your organization will grow. So that's the formula. And if there's a formula and it's that simple, it probably makes sense to check how we measure this stuff. And it turns out that two of these three things are easy to measure, and one of them is not that difficult to measure, but we probably don't bother. So how do we know if we have a meaningfully differentiated product? Well, that's easy. You earn a better margin than your competitors do. The only exception to that is if you're giving away margin in exchange for aggressive growth, like Dell did or Amazon did. So if you want to check to make sure that you have a differentiated product, you want to check to earn that you you want to check to confirm that you're earning a better margin than your competitors. And if you're not, it either means that you don't have a meaningfully differentiated product, or you do, but you have strategically chosen to give away margin in exchange for aggressive growth. So if you can tick the box on aggressive growth, you're fine. If not, you're back to the, whoops, we need a more meaningfully differentiated product problem. The bottom line is it's easy to measure. Operational performance is easy to measure because operational performance in almost every case reduces to speed. We know how to measure speed. If we're fulfilling a standard order type, we could simply measure the velocity directly, the number of days. If we're fulfilling a mix of different types of orders with different lead times, you'll know how to measure that. It's called DIFOT, on-time delivery performance. So instead of measuring the velocity directly, we allocate a default lead time or a promised lead time to each order, and we measure the percentage of orders that are delivered on time, which is an indirect measure of velocity, particularly if we're committed to quoting more and more aggressive lead times, or if your customers are committed to demanding more and more aggressive lead times. Either way, you end up with speed, and speed is great. Do you know how to count that too? The third one, we remember that sales reduces to, figuratively speaking, someone standing on a soapbox loudly proclaiming the existence of your proposition. The question is, well, how loudly are we making this proclamation? And as far as I'm concerned, loudly translates to the number of selling conversations. Presumably, the reason we have a sales function is because we recognize it's necessary for salespeople to talk to other folks about the existence of our compelling proposition. So if we're going to measure something, what we should be measuring is not the number of salespeople we have, not the number of clicks we have on our landing pages or our websites, but the number of selling conversations our salespeople have, because that's the medium via which a salesperson delivers value. Now, there's an interesting observation we can make about selling conversations. And that's that salespeople love them, and generally speaking, customers don't. What I mean by that is there are very few customers who come to work looking forward to having selling conversations with your salespeople, something that your customers will say yes to reluctantly on those occasions where they absolutely must have selling conversations. Now, what that means is that, at least in the short term, the performance of selling conversations is a zero-sum game. So what I mean by that is if customers speaking generally don't want to have selling conversations, and if they will say yes to a selling conversation only when it's critical for them to have one, What that means is if your salespeople perform each one additional selling conversation each week, that selling conversation is almost certainly being performed at the expense of one of your competitors' salespeople. So what I'm saying is a sales conversation that your salespeople have today is a selling conversation that your competitors' salespeople do not have. Now that leads to an interesting realization. If there's a finite, relatively inelastic number of selling conversations that your target market has an appetite for in any period of time, it makes sense for you to, number one, calculate what is your fair share of those selling conversations, which is the total number discounted for your market share, and then to make sure that you are performing more than your fair share. So if you believe that the marketplace in aggregate, or that buyers within the marketplace in aggregate have the appetite for 300 selling conversations a week, and you have 10% market share, your fair share of those selling conversations would be 30 a week. I think that if you want to grow aggressively, it would make sense for you to design your sales function so as to ensure that your salespeople perform more than your fair share of those selling conversations, probably 2, 3, or 4 times your fair share. So if your fair share is 30, a sensible starting point where the design of your sales function is concerned is to ensure that your sales function is designed so as to ensure that your salespeople every week have 60, 90, or 120 selling conversations, meaning that your sales function is punching above its weight class. Now that in isolation doesn't mean that your organization is going to grow. We have to reflect on the simple generic growth formula, of course. But I think it's not unreasonable to suggest that if you have a compelling proposition as defined previously, and your salespeople are performing more than their fair share, significantly more than their fair share of selling conversations, then your organization will grow. The formula is relatively simple. Now, if you do the calculus, if you work through the math that I just suggested, estimate how many selling conversations are performed in aggregate in your marketplace, estimate what your fair share is by discounting that number for your market share, figure out how aggressive you are about growth, and multiply your fair share by some sensible multiplier, 2, 3, or 4 times. What you guys are almost certain to discover is that the math would suggest that your salespeople should be performing 2, 3, or 4 times the volume of selling conversations than they're performing currently. When we walk most organizations through the math, they end up discovering that they are performing their fair share of selling conversations, or perhaps a little less than their fair share. And my take on that would be, well, gosh, it's hardly a surprise that your organization isn't growing because it doesn't look like it was designed to. So if you want to design your organization explicitly to grow, let's have more selling conversations. Now, it's at this point where you run into a problem. The way that your sales function is designed currently makes it very difficult for your salespeople to have selling conversations. It's because they're so busy performing non-sales activities. So we would define non-sales activities as managing repeat transactions, solving customer problems, generating quotes, designing solutions, and all of those activities that are not selling conversations by our definition. The upside of that is if you wanted to increase significantly your volume of selling conversations by adding more salespeople, that would be a very expensive endeavor. If you're a $20 million business and you have 5 salespeople and you wanted to triple your number of selling conversations so that you can punch above your weight class, that might mean going from a team of 5 salespeople to a team of 15 salespeople, which would be unconscionable for a $20 million organization. So that's not an exciting proposition. But when you reflect on the fact that most salespeople spend most of their time not selling, then you're in an exciting situation where you can increase significantly your volume of selling conversations without increasing your sales headcount. You don't need more salespeople. You just need your salespeople. You just need the salespeople who you already have stop performing non-sales activity and in their place perform exclusively selling conversation after selling conversation after selling conversation. And pretty much every organization that we work with is in a situation where they can hit even the most aggressive target for volume of selling conversations without increasing their direct sales. So the direction of the solution here, if we want you to punch above your weight class, is to redesign your organization so that salespeople can focus exclusively on selling conversations. Probably remember was directive number 1 at the beginning. So I want to talk a little bit about how to do this in practice. And the one thing that you're going to realize as we get started with this conversation, that I'm not suggesting to you that you should grow sales messing with your sales function. I'm suggesting you should grow sales restructuring the rest of the organization, or to be more specific, I'm suggesting you grow sales by restructuring functions that are adjacent to your sales function. I don't want you to do much work on your sales function. There's not much work there to be done. The real work that needs to be done in your organizations is in customer service, engineering, possibly procurement, definitely marketing. Not a lot of work to be done on sales. And I would caution you, if you have a speaker at one of these events, or if you have someone who visits your organization who claims that they're going to create a meaningful increase in sales for you by messing with your sales department, I would be very, very skeptical of that claim. In my experience, it's almost certainly not going to be true. They can sell you a new CRM, they can sell you some sales training, they can sell you some marketing automation stuff. But if the solution that they're proposing is going to be delivered within your sales and marketing department exclusively, my suggestion is there's not much headroom. They're promising anything more than an incremental improvement in sales performance, you're not going to get it. In my experience, to generate a meaningful increase in sales performance, 80% of your effort needs to be deployed on those functions that are adjacent to your sales functions. So let's look at why. If you look at the screen right now, we have a salesperson, a single salesperson, floating in the ether there. And around the salesperson, we have 3 functions: customer service, promotions, and engineering. And they're the 3 functions I want to talk to you about first. Now, the objective is to put this salesperson that we're looking at on the screen in an environment where they do nothing other than what we call meaningful selling interactions. I'm just going to call them sales conversations for the purpose of this event. And by sales conversations, I mean talking to new or existing customers, convincing them to purchase something that they wouldn't otherwise have purchased. That's the only thing we classify as a selling conversation. And that's all we want salespeople doing. The key to getting salespeople doing just that is to take everything else for which they feel they are responsible currently and place it elsewhere. And by elsewhere, I mean in one of these departments. So we're going to take anything that looks like a transactional task and stick it in customer service. We're going to take anything that looks like an engineering task and stick it in engineering. And we're going to hold the marketing department responsible for generating sales opportunities at a faster rate than salespeople can consume them. So that if you're a salesperson and you arrive at work in this environment, you sit at your desk and you talk to prospective customers all day long because there's nothing else for you to do, and because there are plenty of prospective customers for you to occupy yourself talking to. That's the simple end result. Devil's in the detail, though. So let's talk about the changes that we make to these other functions. The reality is, in pretty much every organization that we encounter, the changes we need to make to customer service, engineering, and promotions are not trivial. They are significant changes. Significant enough to mean that practically we need to re-engineer each of these departments. We need a complete redesign. And let's start by talking about customer service, and you'll see why, I think, reasonably quickly. The direction of the solution is pretty simple. We want salespeople to take everything that they are doing today that is transactional in nature and push it to customer service and stop doing those activities. So we don't want salespeople processing orders. We don't want salespeople generating quotes, and we don't want salespeople resolving issues for customers or answering technical questions. We don't want salespeople to have any involvement in those transactional tasks. It means we want to move all of those transactional tasks to your customer service department. Now, if you were to go back to your organization today and issue a directive, and the directive is salespeople can no longer perform these activities, they must route them all to customer service, it would be catastrophic, most likely. I mean, I don't know for sure, but the odds are it would be catastrophic. And the reason it would be catastrophic is that your customer service department lacks the resources and it lacks the capability to take responsibility for all of those tasks that are going to be pushed to customer service by the sales department. Most of you probably have technical salespeople. And that probably means that your technical salespeople are answering questions that your customer service department isn't equipped to answer. If you want your salespeople to be actual salespeople, what that means is that capability must be moved to the customer service department. And if your customer service department at the moment is only handling about 60 or 70% of the basic transactional tasks that are performed on a day-to-day basis, that means your customer service department is seriously under-resourced and you need more folks in that department. And you need to figure out a way to get more folks in that department without causing your financial controller to have a conniption. So to cut a long story short, let me tell you how we fix this problem for customer service departments, because it's conceptually simple. It's a little bit radical, but it's relatively easy to implement. And without question, the changes I'm going to suggest you make to your customer service department are a huge win for organizations who go down this path. So a number of things that you need to do to customer service. Number one, your organization should have one customer service team, at least one customer service team by region. And by region, I mean North America is a region. Australasia is a region. The Northwest is not a region. So you should have one customer service team per region. So if you have locations all over North America, you should have one customer service team, not one per location. Now, by one customer service team, I also mean there should be no allocation of customer service reps to customers. All of your customer service reps should be able to take inquiries from every single customer. The only exception to that would be languages. You may find that you don't have some Spanish-speaking customer service reps, and if so, you have no choice but to split incoming work by language. But that's the only division I want to see in a customer service team. I don't want to see a division by geography. I don't want to see a division by product type, and I don't want to see a division by the other one, time zone. Now, if you already have a series of offices all over the country, what my advice is going to be, or would be, is to create one national customer service team in spite of the fact that most of the operators are virtual. So what you need to do is to go to each of your general managers and to say to each of your general managers, these CSRs no longer work for you. They report directly to our national customer service supervisor. And I would say to your national customer service supervisor, this is your team. Your job is to manage this distributed team as if it was a group of people all sitting in your office. So we want to have one work in process meeting at the start of every shift. And the folks who can't physically be there, we want them to be visible on big screens so that everyone can see all of their teammates in other locations. The second thing that we're going to do is we're going to split your customer service team into two tiers, tier 1 and tier 2. Now we can have some division in tier 2 by product expertise, but in tier 1 there is no division whatsoever, none. Everyone in tier 1 is a generalist. And you probably guess where I'm going here. We're taking all of the inbound inquiries. We're routing 100% of the inbound inquiries to your generalist tier 1 customer service reps. You want to have a big tier 1 team, because the bigger the tier 1 team, the better the availability that you're offering the marketplace. Or to be slightly more technical, the bigger your tier 1 team, the lower the cost of the slack or the protective capacity that you need to maintain in order to provide a high level of availability to your customers. So you want to have a big tier 1 team. Every single inbound inquiry should go to your tier 1 team. Emails, phone calls, everything. If you have a receptionist in your organization or a number of receptionists, our standard trick is to grab all the receptionists and put them in the customer service team. There is no need for calls to be originating in reception if most of them are going to terminate in your customer service team, which they should. So a nice big tier 1 customer service team. We're going to take all of the tasks that are associated with the work that's done in customer service, order processing, issue resolution, and quoting. And we're going to do a Pareto analysis, 80-20 analysis. And we're going to take 80% of those tasks, which are simple in nature, and make the tier 1 team responsible for performing all of that 80%. And the remaining 20% that are complex and longer lead time, we're going to have the tier 1 customer service reps push discrete tasks, not complete work packets, just discrete tasks, to tier 2 specialists. So in tier 2, we probably would have estimators, application engineers, project coordinators, whatever specialists are required to support tier 1 operators. Now, it's important we remember the objective here. The objective here is to take all of the transactional stuff that's being performed by your current sales team and route it to customer service. That means that we need to resource the customer service team so that every non-sales activity that's being performed by the sales team currently that is transactional in nature can be performed by the customer service team without overwhelming either the technical capacity of the team or the technical ability of the team or the capacity of the team. So you want a big, powerful, dynamic, high-speed customer service team. This transformation of customer service is not that radical, and it's not that difficult. If we were working with you on this transformation, we would get it done in 3 months max if it's a small organization. If you had 15 or 20 locations, we would probably do it in 3 months per batch of locations, say 3 or 4 locations. So in total, it might take longer than 3 months. But if you have just 3 or 4 locations, it would take 3 months to make this transformation and to take the customer service team to the point where they are performing all of those transactional activities, many of which were previously performed by salespeople, at a significantly higher velocity and a significantly higher quality. One thing that most of our clients discover is that when we do this transformation in customer service, the marketplace has a tendency to reward them with more orders, even though we haven't yet touched sales function. So go figure. What that causes many of our clients' executive teams to conclude is that historically, salespeople were actually slowing down transactional business. In other words, if we consider the point that we started with, and that's 70% of your orders are coming from existing customers repurchasing, most of our clients' executive teams are forced to accept that the current structure actually does more harm than good. And if anything, it retards the rate at which existing customers repurchase. Okay, so now we're in a situation where we've taken away from salespeople all those transactional activities. But we can't assume that salespeople have filled in the available time in their calendar with selling conversations. And we can't assume that for 2 reasons. Number one, they probably don't have sufficient sales opportunities. But number two, we have to recognize something about the human nature of, or the nature of salespeople. And that's that if salespeople have any distractions, they will pursue those distractions rather than picking up the phone and selling. And that's because salespeople suffer from call reluctance. And people like to say to me, oh, you mean bad salespeople? And no, I don't. I mean good salespeople. Good salespeople suffer from call reluctance. There's only one type of salesperson who doesn't suffer from call reluctance, and that's a type of person I like to call a psychopath. They don't suffer from call reluctance because they don't have any EQ. And it turns out that psychopaths might make good salespeople, but it's only because they're prepared to crawl over broken glass in order to snatch orders. And trust me, they break a lot of glass. So most of you have probably figured out already you don't want psychopaths on your sales team. If you have intelligent people with reasonable EQ, you will find that those people suffer from call reluctance. All good salespeople do. And what that means is if you provide those people with distractions, they will be distracted. And that's why that's just one of the reasons why it's so important that you clear the deck for your salespeople. So when they come to work and they look at their desks, look at their computers, there's only one activity they can possibly perform: selling conversations, nothing else. So what do salespeople do when we take away transactional tasks? Well, they busy themselves with engineering, of course. And this particularly applies in high-tech environments, engineer-to-order environments, where you're selling things that are bespoke. In bespoke-type environments, obviously you have engineering departments, but what you tend to find is that salespeople end up playing the role of quasi-engineers. They end up designing solutions, and they end up playing sort of a quasi-project management role after the order has been won. And we could spend a lot of time talking about the reason for that. And if you're interested in, if you operate in an engineered order environment, you might want to grab the book and read it, The Machine. And in there, we talk about the notion of product leadership, and the importance of maintaining the integrity of the brief from when you take it all the way through to fulfillment and final commissioning. But I'm not going to go there with this discussion because it's a little bit technical. It'll take a little bit of time. Obviously, the direction of the solution here is we want to take all engineering tasks away from salespeople and put them in the engineering department. But we have a problem. And that's that if we take solution design, project management, and other engineering type tasks away from salespeople and put them in the engineering department, salespeople will not be happy and your customers will not be happy. To understand why, we need to think about what's going to happen. If we say to a salesperson, for example, look, we don't want you designing solutions anymore. We want engineering to do it. Salesperson is going to come back to us in a few weeks' time and report to us that this is an unworkable situation, because what's happening is they get a request for a concept and a budget, in other words, a rough estimate from a customer. They go and they put it into the engineering department. It takes weeks to come back. And when it comes back, what they discover is that the engineering department has not produced a concept and indicative pricing for them. They've generated shop drawings, routings, a bill of material, and given them a price that's been costed right the way down to the last rivet that is completely out of the market. So now we've put the customer in a position where they have to wait weeks and weeks and weeks for a solution that is not fit for, which is not fit for purpose. Now, it's important to understand why this happens. And the reason it happens is that most engineering departments are simply a pool of engineers. And the work that consumes most of an engineer's time is what we could call production engineering. So it's shop drawings, routings, bills of material, all that kind of stuff. And production engineering is long lead time, low cadence work. It's also very important work because it turns out that production engineering is closer to the money than all the other engineering stuff. And by the other engineering stuff, I mean new product development, NPD, and sales-related engineering tasks. And because production engineering is closer to the money, we find ourselves in a situation where these big, low cadence, long lead time activities take automatic priority over sales-related engineering tasks. That's only half the problem. The other half of the problem is because production engineers live in a high-resolution universe, every job that gets given to them gets performed at a high resolution. But prior to sale, we don't want a high-resolution output from the engineering department. We want a low-resolution output from the engineering department, and the engineering department is not equipped to deliver that. So what we have to do here, and you may notice a recurring theme, we have to split your engineering department into two groups, at least two, realistically four. I'll get to that in a minute, but definitely two groups. We need your design engineering group, which is sales-facing, to be completely separate from production engineering. And by completely separate, I mean it needs to contain different people with zero contamination between those groups. And the reason for that is that design engineering is a class of work that should be performed at a higher cadence and a lower resolution than production engineering. And if you mix the people, you mix the cadences and you mix the resolution. And if you mix low resolution and high resolution and low cadence and high cadence, you end up with low cadence and high resolution, which is the opposite of what your salespeople want from your engineering department. So the trick is to split your engineering department into two groups, design engineering, objective of which is to produce quick and dirty concepts with directional pricing or budgets at high velocity, and production engineering, whose job it is to support the production department as your engineering team currently does. That split is critical. Practice, though, what you will discover in short order is you actually need to split your department into at least three groups, if not four. The reason for that is if your engineering department is like every other engineering department, you will come to discover there are one or two individuals in your engineering department who have deep domain expertise. And if you put those individuals in one group or the other, you end up in a situation where they're off limits to the other group. And what that means is if you have your individuals with deep domain expertise, let's call them subject matter experts. If you have your SMEs in production engineering, what you're going to end up discovering is your design engineers can't do their job properly without access to the production engineers. And you can bet your bottom dollar that the production engineering team isn't going to give design engineers access to those people. So in practice, what you need to do is to split your engineering team into three groups: design engineering, production engineering, and a couple of subject matter experts who sit there like oracles on the hill, waiting to consult with both production and design engineers. So you now have an engineering department split into 3 groups. If it's a small department, let's say you have 5 engineers, what you might find is that you have 3 production engineers, 1 design engineer, and 1 subject matter expert. If you're bigger, it becomes less of a problem. If you're bigger still, you almost certainly have a requirement for new product development as well, which means you actually need to split engineering into 4 groups: subject matter experts, production engineers, design engineers, and new product development. New product development will suffer the same fate as design engineering if you don't engineers out from the general pool. And that is that if you expect engineers from the general pool to do new product development, the only time that new product development will be done is when customers come to you and demand a custom solution. Now, for some of you, that's adequate. But for many of you, those who want to compete on the basis of continual innovation, that would be a recipe for disaster. So this restructure of engineering, folks aren't going to like it till it's done. Once it's done, they're going to wonder why it wasn't done years ago. The restructure is probably going to take about the same time as the restructure of customer service. It might actually be quicker because you probably don't have to add any additional headcount. Let's give ourselves another 3 months. So we've spent 3 months minimum restructuring customer service. We spent 3 months restructuring engineering. We haven't touched sales yet, but guess what? Sales have been benefiting this whole time. First, customers discovered it was easier to transact you. Now customers are discovering that when they come to you with inquiries about bespoke orders, they're getting low resolution concepts, indicative prices within a day or so of a request. And trust me, your customers will love this. And you will probably find that that gives you a significant speed advantage when it comes to quoting over your competitors. And let me talk about that for a minute. Most organizations don't recognize the value of generating a quote faster. And here's the value. If a customer asks 5 salespeople for a quote, when each salesperson accepts the RFQ, they enter a self-imposed blackout period. They can't talk to the customer anymore until they deliver a quote. The customer gives you permission to quote, and you ring them the next day. They're going to say, well, do you have a quote? And if you don't, then they're going to say, well, why are you ringing me? Now, if you can quote in 3 days and your competitors take 3 weeks to quote, which is what's likely to happen if you have a pooled engineering team with bespoke solutions, what that means is that your salesperson's blackout period ends in 3 days when they deliver the proposal. But your competitors' salespeople are still in their blackout period for another 2.5 weeks. So your salesperson has 2.5 weeks to pester the customer, asking for the order, asking for the order, asking for the order, asking for the order. 2.5 weeks. That is a huge advantage, huge advantage. Most organizations don't even recognize, even salespeople don't even recognize that it exists, and consequently don't exploit it. So now we've essentially cleared the deck for salespeople. There's nothing for salespeople to do other than have selling conversations. Well, that's not strictly true. The problem is your salespeople don't have anyone to talk to. And to solve that problem, we need to do 2 things. We need to change the definition of the word sales opportunity, and we need to configure our marketing department so that our marketing department can generate opportunities at a faster rate than salespeople can consume them. Now, the job of the marketing department, at least in my world, our world, is to replenish salespeople's opportunity queues. So the idea is, if we want a salesperson to do nothing other than selling conversations are performed against these things called sales opportunities. And if you perform enough selling conversations against an opportunity, that opportunity is going to, in time, resolve to either won or lost. And turns out most of them will resolve to lost. About 90-something% of them will resolve to lost, and a single-digit percentage of them will resolve to won. That's just how the economics of how sales work. Now, the result of that is if a salesperson starts off with a queue of about 80 or 90 opportunities, enough to keep them busy, and they perform selling conversation after selling conversation after selling conversation, because our salespeople are internal now with no distractions, we could reasonably expect in an industrial environment our salespeople to have 15 to 20 selling conversations a day. So if we have a team of salespeople having 15 to 20 selling conversations a day, we would expect each salesperson to close about 10 opportunities a day. Now, close does not mean win. Close means complete. That means 10 opportunities a day are resolving to either won or lost. Maybe 1 is won and 9 are lost. More realistically, a fraction of an opportunity is won and 9.9 out of the 9.9 of them are lost. The job of your marketing department, in part, needs to be to replenish the salesperson's opportunity queue, so that the salesperson starts work on Monday with 80 or 90 opportunities in queue, finishes work on Monday with that minus 10, 70 in queue. When they come to work the next day, that queue needs to be replenished for them, and that is the job of marketing. So what we're doing is creating a tight coupling between, where's my slide advancing? We're creating a tight coupling between the sales department and the marketing department. So there's 2 keys to doing this. The first is we need to redefine sales opportunity. And the second thing is we need to restructure marketing. I told you there's a recurring theme here. We define sales opportunity as exactly that, an opportunity to sell something. So what my suggestion is that you guys go back to your organizations and get rid of this caustic idea of qualification. We do not want salespeople engaged with qualified opportunities. We want salespeople engaged with opportunities. When salespeople talk about qualified opportunities, what they're trying to signal without saying it directly is that they don't want to talk to a prospective customer unless there's a high likelihood of a win. So if salespeople go about qualifying a prospective customer, they will ask them questions like, do you have budget? And are you in the process of purchasing something currently? And if the customer answers yes to those questions, they deem them to be qualified. Now, my preference is if a customer answers yes to those 2 questions, that we route them directly to customer service. They don't need the salesperson's salesmanship. They're already planning on purchasing. Salespeople shouldn't be talking to them. Salespeople should occupy themselves talking to those prospective customers who do not have budget and who are not currently in the process of purchasing. That's where your growth is going to come from. In other words, we want your salespeople to be tapping on the shoulder of your competitors' customers. And those are the people who will not be prepared to admit to your salespeople that they are in play at this particular point in time. So we're getting rid of the notion of qualification, and we're defining a sales opportunity as simply an opportunity to sell. So what that means is an opportunity is an organization or an individual that has been identified by the marketing team that has a non-zero likelihood of purchasing during some sensible time horizon. Now, if you adopt that definition of sales opportunity, it will become immediately apparent to you that there's no such thing as a shortage. There can be no such thing as a shortage of sales opportunities. Because I'm sure this is true for all of you. Your competitors have no shortage of customers. And every customer of one of your competitors is a prospective customer of yours. So there is no shortage of people for your salespeople to talk to. Job of marketing is to serve up those prospects to your salespeople in the form of sales opportunities. So the way the process of opportunity duration needs to work is that the senior executive team needs to come up with compelling propositions. In other words, reasons why your competitors' customers would want to talk to one of your salespeople. Your marketing department then needs to build lists of decision makers. In other words, your competitors' customers' buyers or chief engineers or whatever. And your marketing department needs to serve up those lists of contacts to salespeople in the form of sales opportunities at the rate at which salespeople abandon opportunities. Now, you may get an objection from your salespeople at this point. Your salespeople may say, well, I don't like the idea of cold calling. This is cold calling. And you need to tell your salespeople that cold calling is a meaningless concept. It is. Now, what salespeople are trying to signal when they say they don't like cold calling is that they don't want to talk to strangers. But they're never going to come out and say that. Because if they told you that they didn't like to talk to strangers, it would cause you to question whether they're in the right role or not. But there is some value in the message that salespeople are sending when they reference cold calling, in spite of the careless articulation. And that is that salespeople don't want to engage in a large volume of wholly unproductive activity. So it's not that salespeople don't want to talk to strangers. It's that salespeople don't want to have a high volume of unproductive interactions with strangers. Now, it turns out that the key to the productivity of an interaction function of how compelling your proposition is. So it's your job as owners and senior executives within your organizations to give your salespeople compelling propositions to start conversations with. And if your salespeople approach strangers with these propositions, and if they do a reasonably good job of articulating the proposition, and a reasonable number of prospective customers are prepared to engage in a conversation, then you have done your job properly. And all you have to do moving forward is insist that salespeople do theirs, and your organization will grow. So this line of reasoning takes the shackles off marketing. It's no longer their job to generate qualified opportunities. It's their job to simply serve up opportunities to salespeople at the rate at which they consume them. And it's the job of the senior executive team to ensure that your marketing department has compelling propositions that they can use to initiate conversations on behalf of your sales team. Realistically, where marketing is concerned, this requires a restructure of marketing. Most marketing departments spend most of their time engaged in what I would call what everyone calls marcoms, marketing communications, building websites, investor relations, building catalogs, et cetera, et cetera. All of that is important plumbing work, but it's plumbing work. It's low cadence stuff. To support the sales team, we need a group of marketing that is tightly coupled with sales, and we call that promotion. So we'll typically split a marketing team into marcoms, one group called marcoms and one group called promotions. The promotions group will typically have just one person in it, and it's that person's job to choke the release of sales opportunities to salespeople on a daily basis, so that every day when a salesperson comes to work, the opportunities that were closed yesterday and disappeared from their open opportunity queues have been replenished. That there's no reason for them to do anything between the hours of 8 and 6 or whatever hours they work, then sit there with a headset on, having selling conversation after selling conversation after selling conversation all day long. If you take your existing sales team and reconfigure their work environment so that they spend all day, every day having selling conversations, you will find that you can easily increase your volume of selling conversations by 3, 4, 5 times without any increase in sales-related payroll. Now, you may find that some of your existing salespeople don't want to work in that environment. That's fine. Probably don't need to keep all of your salespeople. And the money that you save, you need to spend in customer service, adding a few extra operators to customer service anyway. So we've discussed the theory here. We started with the basic philosophy. We progressed to the theory and all the way to execution. So I think I've given you some fairly paint by number type suggestions there that you can go back and implement in your businesses. The only thing I have to do now is to myself to the fury of the room, because there's been quite controversial recommendations I've made here today. So it's question time, and I'm in your hands.
If you'd like to use the raise hand, then Justin will be able to call on you for any questions real quick. If not, I'll let Ray say his closing remarks.
That's okay. Justin, fascinating, really interesting, a different concept in sales. But one question I do have for you is, can we share these slides with these attendees so that way they can take a look at it? And do you want to talk about the your slide on the left-hand side about your book?
Oh, yes, I do. Thank you for reminding me. Yes, so I have a book, as you probably know, called The Machine. I've dropped a link in the public chat. If you click on that link, we're actually offering everyone in the room a complete copy of The Machine. So no charge. We'll give you a copy of the whole book. Normally we give away the first 4 chapters, but because we love the manufacturing industry, if you follow that link, you can actually fill in your details, and we will, by we, I mean Amazon, will mail you a full copy of the machine, not just the first 4 chapters, the whole thing.
Great, Justin. Thank
we'll
you.
also send you an overview of our services, which you can read or not read. That's your choice, but it's a great way to grab a copy of the book if you don't have one already. I'm sure some of you do.
Super. Thank you. Thank you very much. Michelle, we have a question that came up. Is can you drop the link as well into the chat box or provide it separately?
Top of the chat. Let me drop it again.
We actually have a, Justin, we've set up a booth for you inside the expo hall.
It wouldn't let me do anything.
Okay.
And so I will actually go there after this and put that link up.
Okay.
And put the link up in that booth. And if you'd like to stop by,
Called 180 Solar. I was recommended to connect with you.
So can I ask the audience to please silence their microphones?
Just because of the business that we're in.
One Solar, can you silence your microphone?
I got it, Ray.
Or was he asking a question?
No, I think he was on a phone call.
Okay.
So again, back to the question I had earlier, is it okay to provide the slides as well?
Yes,
to
yes,
the
of course.
attendees? Thank you so much. Anybody else? Do we have any questions? This is, like Justin says, very controversial on how to reformat, reset your sales. So any questions from the audience? If not, what I'll do is, Justin, if you could stay here just for a couple of minutes, if anybody wants to come up to the stage and ask Justin for any questions offline, please do. Just as a reminder, I've got to get to my